On this channel, we like to discuss different ideas and concepts around access to cannabis. And today we're going to specifically look at compounding pharmacies and how that can be used to provide medical access. I know there's definitely an argument to be made for increased responsible adult use access, not just in South Africa, but globally. But this is an interesting skew on how to increase access to medicines, and I hope you enjoy this discussion. Hi guys, today I have on Declan Burger from Sativius, and we're going to really tackle the aspect related to compounding, specifically of medicines. And on that point, Declan, welcome to have you on. And the first question I really want to get into, how is compounded medicine different from what would typically be known as a registered medicine that you could just buy off the shelf or under certain schedules, for access through a GP?
All right. Well, firstly, thanks, Jeff, for this. I really do appreciate it. And I think getting the knowledge of compounding, getting it out into the public is definitely a good step in the development of our medicines industry. So to start off with that question, the difference between a compounded medicine and what is a registered medicine, I think it's very important to understand that a registered through a license holder who's licensed under Section 22C1B of Act 101, which is more for manufacturers, distributors, wholesalers, and entities that are in the standard supply chain of a pharmaceutical product that you'll find on the shelf in a store or at a normal pharmacy behind the counter or so on. Whereas a compounded medicine or a compounded product is a product that is regulated through a license holder who's licensed under Section 22C1A. Now, this license is regulated and controlled by the Director General of the Department of Health, whereas the other license is regulated and controlled by the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. So understanding the difference between who's regulating and controlling it starts to allow you to understand what kind of work is done behind it. So for a product gone through SAPRA, it undergoes a lot of clinical trials, stability tests, and so on. And all this information to understand the safety, quality, and efficacy of the substance registered or the product registered, with the intention of making this a produced product that is available on the shelves, that has a medicinal claim to it, that has quality control inherent to its supply chain management. Now, a compounded product is a lot more niche. It's quite a beautiful thing. It's sort of a doff of the hat to the historical approach to pharmaceuticals and medicine, dating back to the times of alchemy and so on, where things would get mixed and combined and everything and given to somebody and said, this will cure whatever. So it's really a beautiful link to the heritage of the medicines industry, whereby substances are added together or created in such a way that it is custom made for the patient themselves. The beauty of this is that it cuts away a huge amount of the information that I mentioned previously relating to the mass manufactured products, which is your cost of branding, your cost of the supply chain logistics fees between distribution facilities, wholesalers, and retail pharmacies. The three of those immediately add on a significant markup to the product. So in a nutshell, a compounded product is more specific to the patient themselves, and it's theoretically more affordable as well. So that's from a higher level. And if I can maybe continue a little bit further on that as well, and why for me, it's something that I'm quite passionate about, is that the substance that a compounding pharmacy is able to compound with is something that's already been found in a registered medicine under the SAPRA, call it the SAPRA side of things. So they can't just randomly pick up some pharmaceutical substance found somewhere in the world and compound and dispense that. It has to be a product that has been found within the registration dossier of a medicine that's already been registered. So that's a way to still keep the assurance of quality, safety, and efficacy of the product without keeping it within the limitations of a mass-produced pharmaceutical product.
Yeah,
it's quite a nice thing.
So I mean,
yes.
You've mentioned a few things that I want to harp on here because it really is. So the first thing is, naturally, it's more precision medicine based because it's really customizable to the patient's, whatever ailment you're trying to address. And it does tie itself back to the roots of medication and medicine, especially a lot of botanicals as they've evolved in the 1900s, 1800s. The other thing is, yes, the one thing you cannot do is, you can probably because you're using, like you said, a previously registered active in that space. Yeah, and I got a question on that one as well. So we're going to come back to that one. But, things like stability fall away because often the way I think of compounding is like with sterols, like a company like Fresenius Kabi might then compound a drip specifically for a patient, and that patient will need that express, like overnight within 24 hours. And it's typically any physician that's in that kind of emergency room environment, mixing in plasma products, whatever it is that goes into that drip. It's definitely, the use is pretty much present, but it's not always the mainstream that you often see. So I want to touch on the point you mentioned of a registered medicine, because we want to come around back to cannabis on this front, and it makes me think of Madrigal preparations in Germany, which is often like compounded medicine. But previously registered, you mentioned that term, and this makes me ask, because we're jumping in here, but it's like, THC has a history of prior registration through dronabinol in the past. So there's some scope definitely of that one. CBD is perhaps more tricky if there hasn't been a cannabidiol registration, because that might limit its ability to be compounded. Or is there a bit of leeway in terms of this?
All right, so this is wonderful. This is where I want the conversation to go. It allows me to explain this in a much more understandable way. So to understand what I mean about and the importance of it being a registered product is, in the Act, there's sections made in the Act which indicate what a compounding pharmacy may or may not do. And I think while I'm on this, one of the things is a compounding pharmacy cannot replicate exactly what a registered product is. So they are limited to that, but they cannot exceed the quantity of that substance from what is found in the registered dossier. So what I mean by that is, if there's a pharmaceutical product out there that is indicated where the total pack contents for a 30-day supply is, let's just say for argument's sake, 100 milligrams. If you were to compound and dispense under the same dosage regime, you can't exceed that 100 milligrams. And the final product cannot be exactly the same as the registered product. So that's a bit of protection to the registered products market, so that this doesn't become a generics factory. All right, so that being said, in the Act, a registered pharmaceutical product already undergoes the stability in clinical trials in that registration dossier. And more specifically, the registration dossier has a section for substances, which is called section 32S, the S meaning substance. And then there's also section 32P, which is the final product section. Now, these registration dossiers have different formats all over the world, depending on the jurisdiction, but they all kind of, they can be converted to sort of speak the same thing. So the section 32S is also known as active pharmaceutical ingredient master file. This is something that we have brought up with SAPRA a couple of times, because the importance of this is allowing a organic product, which is scheduled based on the compounds that could be extracted from it. But the actual form of this product it's always going to change. So it's less about the quantities of the THC and CBD within the product and more about the prevalence of it. The fact that it is in there, that's what makes it a regulated product. Mm. So the API master file is something that the compounding pharmacy will need to have access to somehow to be able to explain to a patient or to a practitioner the stability of it and so on. It's very important to be able to do that. I think something else that's also extremely important to mention between THC or dronabinol and CBD is that there's no registered CBD product. CBD has a very interesting scheduling status right now, where it can be a Schedule 4 and a Schedule 0 at the same time. Now, fortunately, Schedule 0s or complementary medicines don't have a very formal registration process. It's more of a licensing process where you get the product licensed by a company, where the interesting part comes with that 600 milligrams per pack size for a 30-day dose. But now if it goes over that, it's now Schedule 4, which necessitates the full pharmaceutical registration with the registration dossier. So no one's ever done that in South Africa that I know of. And I think personally, I don't think it's something that I'll be able to see coming up anytime soon either. However, THC or dronabinol has been found in a registered product. And I think this is where things get very exciting. So there's in the late 90s, there was a product that was registered with dronabinol in it. And based on that section in the Act, it therefore enables compounding pharmacies to compound and dispense the active substance found within that registered product. So that's very exciting. Now, of course, there's a question of saying, well, does that allow the cannabis organic product to be compounded and dispensed in the sense of grabbing it out of a jar and putting it into a smaller jar? That's a gray area. But what I can be pretty sure about is that the extracts can be definitely going through a compounding pharmacy based on my knowledge as is. And yeah, that's definitely the exciting part. So when we're looking at dronabinol, please stop me if I'm talking too much.
No, I'm going to jump in here. So you mentioned, so just for clarification for everyone, dronabinol is typically the synthetic version. So marinol is often how it's traded. So the difference is it's just a synthetic version of delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. This is quite a hot topic globally, is just because it's present as a natural occurring substance in cannabis, especially in the flowering bodies, in the trichome specifically. Now, the ability to now make an extract from that is very reminiscent. I mean, chemically, we're talking at the isomer level, really, like the same thing. So, that ability to now dispense it, because it's been previously registered, is very interesting. But it also makes me very curious about, because one of the benefits of compounding is just the ability to make medicine more accessible to some degree. And it's almost a big shame that it has to be previously registered as an API for it to be compounded, but we won't get into the semantics of all of that, because we really want to see more progressive legislation around botanicals. But we can understand the need by the regulator or any regulator globally to understand what's in the product. And that's where this stems from, is because what's not known is often the concern. So I'm very interested in this dronabinol conversation. So in this regard, because now let's get into a little of the nuts and bolts. We'll probably circle back around, but who can dispense, who can do compounding? Because, can any pharmacist tackle this head on? Can any registered pharmacy tackle this head on? What are the limitations, restrictions? There has to be some kind of quality management system in place, because theoretically, and now I'm going to tie another question to this, so let's balance it as our cycle around. But, can compounding, the definition, just be moving it from a bigger jar to a small jar? Or does it have to be an extract? These are the things, but I know you mentioned an extract is probably more reminiscent of something related to like how dronabinol is prepared. So that probably would fit a little better and cut some of the variance down. But I'd love to hear your view on this.
All right, so let me first start about the pharmacy or the compounding pharmacy itself, how it works, who can do what, and so on. So let's start off with a scenario. So I have an ailment which can be linked to, say, maybe a past experience or past history of abuse of painkillers or some other pharmaceutical product. I don't really know what it is. I'm just a general public person who's been prescribed something in the past that was then linked to a history of abuse of that substance with me. I would then go to an authorized prescriber, who is somebody who's licensed or certified under Section 17 of the Pharmacies Act. It's a Pharmacies Act. Who is able to prescribe medicine. So there is regulations on how the script needs to look. It tells you exactly how it needs to be laid out, the different ways of sending this to whoever. Do you give it directly to the patient, or can you send it directly to the pharmacy? There are regulations defining exactly what you can and can't do and how you can do them as well. Fortunately, they say how, not just what you can and can't. All right, once you as a pharmacy, as a compounding pharmacy, are in receipt of this, you are able to then compound and dispense exactly what is on that. But there's a thing that I see is often not really complied to with the modern day pharmacies, and that's something called the pharmacist consultation. Maybe the older generation might remember this, but going down to the pharmacy was more social than what it is today, where you would actually discuss with your pharmacist and explain to them what your problems are, or how you're feeling about things, and so on. And yeah, I think it's something that would probably benefit if it came back as well. I think there's a lot of people out there who are blindly taking medicine from their pharmacist, and the pharmacist is just putting their name on it and giving it to them. That's a huge benefit of a compounding pharmacy. It increases that pharmacist consultation. Right. The pharmacist would then ask me, "How do you feel? What? Tell me more about your past with this thing." obviously on the script, it's going to say dronabinol. It'll tell you exactly how much should be prescribed and how your dosage form would be. But they just want to make sure from their side as well, because at the end of the day, their name is still on that product as well, and they're as liable as the doctor who prescribed it. The pharmacist, once completed with their consultation, they can then either themselves or the pharmacist assistant can assist in compounding this product. Say they want in a oral disintegrating strip, which I think is probably where we should be going with this. But anyway, an oral disintegrating strip, much like those old Listerine, those Listerine things that you put on your tongue. Okay, so the beauty of that is that the dosage form doesn't go through the standard digestion system, and the bioavailability and bioabsorption is much higher than a tablet. So then the pharmacist assistant is allowed to be involved with this, as long as they're always under the supervision of the pharmacist themselves. So dronabinol itself is a Schedule 6. Cannabis, any part thereof and so on, that's still a Schedule 7. Whereas if there's any extracts or any excipients or substances form part of that, it brings it down to a Schedule 6 for THC or dronabinol, and a Schedule 4 or Schedule 0 for CBD. Within these schedules, there is information about who can do what. And I think it's very important for the compounding pharmacy themselves to also just go and make sure that they can actually do this, and which person there can do this.
So let me jump in here quickly, because I want to find out about, I mean, obviously I'm seeing a niche for bespoke pharmacy, because it doesn't definitely lend itself to like a typical Clicks, Discount type of franchise chain. It is very much reminiscent to how pharmacies were run. If we think to the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, maybe the early 2000s, it's kind of changed a bit. But that consultative process, the pharmacist provides supervision. Would you need the physician to write the script in addition with the pharmacist for it to be compounded? Or would a pharmacist by themselves have the authority to potentially compound for that patient? Considering that, let's use Schedule 6 products as an example. Does it require both, the doctor and the pharmacist?
All right. So in most cases, yes. Okay. It will require a authorized prescriber in the form of a healthcare professional practitioner, being a doctor. But there are cases in what they call emergency cases, which are also defined within schedules, where it can be, paramedics involved or, so on. So there are clauses for emergency situations, and that's also, earlier you mentioned about the IV bags in hospitals and in ambulances. A paramedic is allowed to use high scheduled pharmaceuticals right there and then on the spot. So yes, most of the time, yes, it is a doctor. There is instances that I've been stumbling upon lately where a pharmacist themselves also has they're also licensed or certified or permitted under the authorized prescribers section of the Pharmacy Act. It's Section 17. So there may be a situation where that's possible. I'm just not entirely confident in that. Based on my background in law, having separation of powers is very important.
Well, that brings me up there, because that's a good point, because I can see how that lends itself to abuse. Like it almost makes me think of like cases of Michael Jackson, where someone's just got unilateral ability to prescribe, dispense, compound. There's got to be some degree of separation. So it's a good point. I really like that. So, I mean, in terms of, so I think we've kind of covered a lot here. I mean, the requirements we've mentioned here, in terms of quality controls, because I mean, this is one of the issues. I think this is a big thing in terms of European markets where there's madrigal formulation. There is a process of ensuring that quality is maintained, because technically the pharmacist is involved in the compounding. So, whether that's just moving from a larger packaging to a smaller packaging, or whether that's performing some kind of basic ethanol extraction, there's a human error scope to this. Like obviously we can't really talk about QMS or quality management systems for cannabis specifically for compounding, because that's what we're highlighting today. But there's probably a baseline for this in terms of other practices. Is this something where you're quite active in terms of guidance, providing guidance in how this is framed and how this should be structured?
All right. So yes, absolutely. Expanding the current knowledge of what a compounding pharmacy can and can't do, and the benefits of it, and the the application specifically of cannabis within compounding pharmacies is something I definitely am active in. But I think to maybe take a step back to increase the understanding of your previous question about quality control and so on. A compounding pharmacy is licensed under the compliance following an inspection of the application of a good pharmacy practices quality management system, or GPP QMS. So as you may know, we have GMP, GWP, GDP, good something practices. In this case, the international standard, or it's probably more local at this point, is the good pharmacy practice. Now, this guideline is rules and codes and conduct and all that is something that the Pharmacy Council will be, or the Director General will be using to conduct their inspections. But now the importance of me bringing this up is that in here, there are 13 general objectives and requirements for these pharmaceutical services. I'll go through as many as I can remember off the top of my head. There's a sound management structure that absolutely is critical. And what I mean by a sound management structure is that there's a pharmacist there always. If there are pharmacist assistants, they all sign the code of conduct as a post-basic pharmacist, or a, there's a number of things that they need to sign and accept the responsibility of this. And I'll get into the principles as well about pharmacists and these pharmacies. So it's a sound management structure. The other one is quality assurance. So that's just to ensure that the quality is maintained through a good pharmacy practice quality management system. The facility needs to comply with statutory requirements. So this means that you can't just build a compounding pharmacy, right next to a school or something. You'll have to consider the statutory requirements of this facility.
So let me jump in there. I want to mention something, because when you mentioned this proximity to something else, what about proximity to an existing 22C1B license holder? As in, I've got a cultivation facility, I'm cultivating, or I have an extraction, a GMP extraction facility. How close, is there any kind of restrictions here? Because I'm sure of the 80 plus cultivators, a lot might be like, well, hey, I've got a pharmacist on site. Can they start compounding from the back door? And I mean, there's limitation here. So maybe unpack that a little.
So, all right. I think it'll be best to leave that for the discretion of the Director General themselves. I think the reasoning for rejection on certain things like this may be a little bit more subjective than I'd like to admit. So I think I'd rather leave that for the inspectorate themselves to go through, because I know exactly where you're going with this, and I've experienced this before with my clients. And I think it would be awesome, but it would also be a little bit strange at the same time, because then the question comes, well, can I be licensed under Section 22C1B for cultivation and A for the compounding of the products cultivated as well in the same facility? Well, maybe. Maybe. I wouldn't advise it, though, mainly on the fact that you'll be very difficult for your client base to reach. And the only other way for your client base to actually reach you would then be for a normal standard pharmacy to then relay the script to you as a compounding pharmacy, which is something I'd love to get into a little bit later on the expansion model of compounding pharmacies. So in a nutshell, I think that kind of a question I'd rather answer, given a different set of circumstances.
No, definitely. It's very nuanced. It's not like you see Aspen having a compounding back door, So it's one where there's definitely
reasons
risk
for that. Yeah.
There's very clear reasons. Yeah. So securitization definitely top of mind. So, but it's an interesting one, because I'm pretty sure that I won't be the only one asking. So I'll let you always, your contact details are here as well for anyone who wants to reach out. But now take us through some of those additional requirements, because I think you were at about step 3 or 4. Right. So be keen to know the others.
So then the next one would be, so that was the facilities must comply with statutory requirements. The guideline indicates how you have your different consultation facilities within the premises, including your storage vault, called a storage vault. It's really just a secure lockable area. I would advise a vault, considering this product has got a street value. So a very good security system is quite important. But in a nutshell, the statutory requirements are basically the good pharmacy practices. Safe systems of work would then be the next one. And that's really just to ensure that everything is clean, in a nutshell, really, to make sure everything is clean, and that it's more about the safety of the patient. primarily. Secondary is obviously the safety of the pharmacist that's working there, but I mean, they're the ones doing the stuff, so I think it's inherent that they'll try and be safe. Well, I wouldn't take it for granted, but make sure you have your code of conduct up on the wall, clean your hands and close taps and so on. So it's very important to have your safe systems of work. The next one then would be the effective systems of drug supply management. So this is quite critical, especially when it comes to the higher scheduled pharmaceuticals. You definitely want to have your systems in place to have calibrated scales, making sure that things are clean and that there's no cross-contamination of anything. Making sure you're doing a full line clearance after every production of something or a previous substance to ensure that there's, once again, no cross-contamination. So the effective systems of drug supply management is quite important. And then that also leads into the next one, which is number 6, which is a prescription monitoring service. So based on the regulations to Act 101, there are certain requirements for a compounding pharmacy to ensure that they have a record system of all the prescriptions that they've received and compounded based on. So that's quite important. We have seen some very impressive software available for this stuff, and I wouldn't say turn it away immediately, but just keep in mind the current space in South Africa with the load shedding and all that. Paper-based, it's very difficult to fail, but if in the event of, say, a fire or anything like that, it's it's a fallback. So maybe having some kind of contingency system where you load it all into the system, but you still keep the physical document is probably the best way to get the A-OK, for sure.
I'm going to jump in one more time. Sorry for that, Declan. I want to...
Yes.
So, I mean, you mentioned a few things. Firstly, traceability is a big one because, especially when it's a product of street value, traceability is always going to be top of mind when it comes to like the Pharmacy Council and any kind of regulatory body in the space. So, that's a good thing you mentioned as a point of consideration. The other one is that cross-contamination. Because there is, I know as well when you clear a line for manufacturing, we talk now registered products and you have full batch manufacturing record, you've got to do cleaning validation. Now, obviously, there's not going to be any cleaning validation that's taking place at the back of a pharmacy or in the compounding area. You're going to have a pretty deliberative SOP, but there's not that same level of quality assurance which is intended for GMP. But within those restrictive frameworks. So it's definitely an interesting one. So it does highlight some of these considerations that anyone going into this needs to think about, because it's not always that clear cut. And on this point, is there a requirement for like adverse events reporting when it comes to this type of when you compound? So let's maybe talk about that, because that's indicative of the quality and the deliberation the pharmacist is applying to the manufacture of these products, and it should be very deliberative whenever you're compounding, because it's really precision dosing. So like you say, calibrated scales, calibrated volumetric containers, all makes a lot of sense. So talk to me about the basically adverse event reporting. How does that work for compounded products?
All right, that's absolutely any scheduled substances that are prescribed or dispensed to a patient definitely still falls within the ADR reporting, the adverse event reporting. I think that's something that's definitely a hot topic with the regulator at this point as well. Very important, especially considering COVID vaccines. But I won't get into that one. So. ADRs they're critical to be reported. Any pharmacist who's aware of it, who's involved with the supply chain of the product or the substance, needs to be involved with that reporting system. It's usually a two-phase approach where you will inform the supply of the product or where the product came from to you of an adverse event. In your procedures, you'll have to have an adverse event report procedure along with a form. And in that procedure, it'll actually tell you exactly what to do. This is something that we also do, obviously. But in that procedure, it'll tell you exactly who you need to inform, in what format you need to do it, and what your time frame is. And as far as I remember, it's a 24-hour time frame. So this is where the responsible pharmacist really becomes responsible. So, yes, it's absolutely involved with any pharmaceutical substance. Adverse events are always recorded and reported.
No, awesome. Excellent. So, Declan, I know we can go down the list, but I think we've done a very solid half an hour on covering the aspects of compounding. I mean, let me maybe move to like some closing remarks in terms of, there's a lot here to talk about because it's very nuanced, and some of it is definitely gray areas that require some consultation and some open deliberation, because it's not just something you just like, there's a complete clear framework for how to tackle this. There are definitely frameworks, but I think it's one where this is why we want to have this conversation, because we see the use of compounding in different jurisdictions. It's a very practical way to implement medicine. It has some known, caveats, how it's different from like registered medicine for sure, but it's still enabling access. And in a market where we have massive backlogs, often enabling access is one of the points of medicine ultimately, especially public health. So in this regard, maybe are there some closing remarks you have around the utilization of compounding for not just cannabis, but maybe just in general, and its potential in the African continent, but specifically South Africa?
All right, so I think this is probably a very good time for me to explain a little bit more about my intention in doing all of this, research and work to communicate this with people. Is I have a very strong desire to stimulate the local economy when it comes to healthcare, because I've got a very strong opinion against healthcare becoming a luxury. I genuinely believe that if people want some kind of medicine, they're going to find a way to get it. So instead of putting up a lot of barriers and a lot of reasons why you can't do it, or the fact that we have to change the law or we have to change regulations, let's try and use exactly what we have, because our regulations and laws were put in place with understandings of concepts, understandings of principles. And by applying some of the most strictest principles in terms of quality, safety, and efficacy to almost any product, should be seen as a safety precaution to the consumer. You could even put food through the same, you could put your olive oil through the same regulation if you had to, and you'll just end up with a very safe and clean product. The only catch or the fallback of the standard application of the Section 22C1B process is that you find there's a lot of very heavy work that needs to be done, and that increases the cost. So back to my full intention of making sure that medicine is not a luxury, the compounding pharmacy somewhat negates a lot of the branding value, a lot of the CTD registration value of these products. And my history comes, I used to, register these products, and I know how much work goes into it. A compounding pharmacy is great. It's awesome to be used for cannabis or cannabis substances. But as a whole, I think that the country could definitely do with a revamping of the compounding solution, purely because of the fact that all they're doing is purchasing the raw active pharmaceutical ingredients from suppliers, whether it's local or international, and they're compounding a product purely for the product's value in itself, where there's no branding, there's none of that unnecessary markup through the supply chain management, but it's purely right there and then for the patient, exactly what they need, how they need it, and it's theoretically quite affordable.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, you're hitting onto a topic that I've come across often with pharmacists is that reality of sometimes it's really you go through a very stringent process of training, and to end up, I'm not going to nail big chains, but like a Discount Clicks, it's pretty much you get told what to do, and you're taking the responsible and the educated pharmacists out of the equation. And this often leads to a lot of pharmacists looking to relocate to other parts of the world, because part of that formal training is to make an informed decision in listening and diagnosing your patient and going through those ailments and then recommendation. And it's always so disappointing to see the brain drain around highly qualified, highly skilled pharmacists, because it's one where I go onto a PC, I look what is approved, I approve it, I give you a generic option, and that is it. It really is very disappointing. I think it's one of those things that I'm also passionate about seeing, is like going back to the roots of a lot of these bespoke pharmacy chains, starting up your own pharmacy, being able to offer this, to train other, junior pharmacists into a business, and not being big corporate, but being very personalized. And I think we look at precision medicine, it's all headed back to personalized medicine, which is ultimately the better form of medicine. And yes, it's not always scalable, and yes, there's some limits, but it's also on one hand, it's accessible. If you do it right, on another point, it becomes really expensive precision medicine. But it's always about that balance. And I really enjoyed this conversation because we've hit a few topics. And I'm going to encourage any viewers who's particularly interested in compounding pharmacy, wanting to know more about pharmacy in general across South Africa, reach out to Declan. So Declan, thank you so much for your time. It's really been quite an informed conversation. You know, for me, I'm not a qualified pharmacist. I'm a biochemist, but I've learned so much over the years with manufacturing, you know, being able to see the manufacturing landscape evolve in South Africa. It's always so encouraging to see smart, qualified pharmacists active in the market. And, you know, I'd like to see this more personalized pharmacy model. And I'm definitely not alone. I know this from speaking to many pharmacists that don't want to leave the country, but they want to be able to do more than just issue a script.
Absolutely. I really appreciate being able to talk about this. I know it's been quite a quiet topic in the past, but I'm very proud of myself to be able to, you know, relay this information to you and to all the viewers. Please feel free to reach out to me, send me an email. Myself or somebody in my team will get back to you and we'll arrange a meeting, and I'm happy to talk more about this. I think the more that know about this, the better. So,
no, absolutely. No, I'm looking forward to having you on. Such a fascinating world. You know, at the end of the day, we want to make medicines that impact patients and improve the quality of anyone's life. And I think this is what's needed in Africa. I mean, it's been exposed by COVID, but I think it's something we need to keep driving. So thanks, Declan. It's been a great conversation.